Hey, everybody, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ. On this episode, we'd like to welcome back Mr. John Voelcker. Now, John is our resident EV guy. He knows a lot about EVs. He did green car reports for years. He's in that circle where I am really not, which is why he's back, because a lot's been happening in the EV world. We're talking about cars like Rivian, like Lucid, things like Tesla. And we've also got gas prices that are $1 million a gallon now. But aside from that, John also just went on this really kind of cool road trip in a couple of really quirky British / Japanese / American cars on kind of a tour of what he called the Tempting Fate tour. We're going to talk about that more in a few minutes. But John, welcome back, and how are you doing?
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I'm doing well. Not driving this week, which is nice.
Not driving this week.
Yeah.
Well, that's good, because like I mentioned earlier, like we've got gas prices right now. I know here in California, I've seen just about $7 a gallon.
I've seen some of those. Holy moly. The highest I think I've seen in New York State is probably 4.5.
Okay.
Oof.
Yeah, it's getting crazy. And it's interesting. People, we're looking at this with everything that's going on in the world right now, right? We're coming off the heels of COVID, and now who knows if World War III is going to happen at any day. I'm just waiting for somebody to push a button, right? Now we've got gas prices that are between $4 and $7 a gallon. And, with that, the automotive world, the whole spectrum of the automotive space is changing, at a pretty rapid rate. But let's talk about gas prices for a second. For us, in California, we always pay on average 50 cents to 70 cents a gallon more than everybody else. That's what It feels like.
Special blends.
Right, of course. And as somebody who is a lover of kind of old V8 stuff, that hurts. So for instance, like my daily is a 96 Ford Bronco with a 33-gallon tank, right? Not the smartest daily, okay. but that's what I drive.
3 times 7.
Mm-hmm. It's to fill it now is probably in the 150s to fill that truck. Now, I will say that currently I have shelved that truck because it is too much, and I am relying on my little 150cc Honda scooter that is 35 years old to tool me around.
Oh, I want to see a picture of that.
Oh, it's great. It's a little Honda Elite 150 with a pop-up headlight. It's the best thing ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I can give you the same advice that I gave to ABC7, the New York news station.
Yes.
Which called me and said, what can we do? And, I am old enough where I remember this advice from the 70s.
Right.
And also the 90s. And also the 2008 gas price spike. So it's the same 3 things. The nerdiest one, number 1, make sure your tires are inflated. I am fascinated how many people I talk to now, because new cars are so reliable, never, ever checked their tire pressures. And
it's
probably
astonishing.
Done at the dealer, but yeah. And sometimes you can it's like, ma'am, your left front tire is a little low. Really?
It is?
Okay. So see, and it's like, yeah. So that's number 1, although there's a worse story about that. I'll tell you another time, but inflate the tires. The sticker is on the door jamb of the driver's door. Read it, and you can go 2 psi over. You will get better mileage. Not doubling it, but you will get incrementally better mileage. Number 2, drive as if there is the proverbial egg between your foot and the accelerator. Often a challenge when talking to car people, but gentle acceleration, coasting down the rest. And number 3, keep the speeds down, because the amount of extra energy you use between 65 and 85 miles an hour is way, 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 way greater than the amount of energy you use to go from, say, 20 to 40 miles an hour. Pushing wind aside is an exponential energy consumption problem. So that's really, some people remember the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, right? That was why they did that. So speeds down, drive gently, keep your damn tires inflated.
Well, I mean, tires is always a mystical. It always boggles my mind that people don't. It is literally the most important part of your car, because without them, regardless of how well your car runs, without them, you're not going anywhere, right? And, when you say something like just put them 2 pounds over, some people, they don't realize that, one, you should be checking I check my tires on a monthly basis, right? And I also check it dependent upon weather, right? So if it gets cold, your air pressure is going to go down. If it gets warm, whatever the case. So that is huge. And one, you should also check your tires for the simple fact that, see how they're wearing. Look at the tread patterns on the tires. Like, I've seen so many people running around on tires where I could see the cords on the inside because they don't check anything.
And like, what's a tread?
What? I don't know. Do I need that? Does that make sense? So, yeah. Okay. So that's great advice on saving some fuel. Do you think that, like, all of this, we know it'll come back down eventually, but, I think consumers right now are freaking out because they're looking at this and they're going, oh my God, how am I going to fill my F-150 with its 35-gallon tank and this? And I think every used car right now that is even remotely fuel efficient is going to go up on Craigslist and in Carvana. And as used car prices have been going bananas now for quite some time. Yeah. But now anything that's fuel efficient is really going to go bananas, I think.
There's some data that shows that people react not to the actual level of gas prices, but the speed of the change.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much, are you paying $4 a gallon or $6 a gallon? It's, were you paying $2.79 last week?
Right.
And it's the shock factor. In 2000, I think it was 2008, when prices, especially in California, soared. Mm-hmm. There was this weird blip in car sales where, for I think 4 months, everybody changed what they were buying, and people were doing dumb shit like trading an F-150 in on a Corolla.
Right.
And there was this weird 4-month period where we had already achieved the gas mileage average for 7 years in the future, just by that mix of vehicles that were being sold. And then, people got used to it. Prices came down a little bit. Everybody reverted to norm. But it's really the speed of the acceleration. I will say, because we're talking about EVs at some point, one of the things that's different now that was not even present in 2008, 2009, is for the first time, I'm starting to see people freak out about gas prices, think about how to not spend so much money today on gas, think about alternatives, and electric vehicles are entering the mix for the first time because some neighbor has a Tesla and he's smirking visibly and said, well, golly, my Tesla costs just the same for 300 miles this week as it did last month. Oh, you're paying so much in gas. Sorry about that. I don't use gas. and it's not just Teslas, to be fair. It's all others.
Of course.
But I think people are now starting to see electric cars are not necessarily just 74-mile Nissan Leafs. They come in a variety of cars, big, small trucks, what have you, and they have ranges that people can imagine in their own lives. And so for the first time, I'm seeing people saying, is an electric car maybe a solution to this gas price zigging and zagging?
I mean, yes, I definitely see that. But then I also go back to the factor that, okay, well, what is your real cost savings going to be? So for instance, say if you're driving an F-150 and that F-150 is valued at $35,000 in the used car market, right? For argument's sake, are you going to sell that and go spend $60,000 on a new Tesla or a Nissan, whatever it is, or whatever, right? So is that savings really going to be there? Because I think for a lot of people, they have this mental picture of getting this short-term saving because no, they're not paying, $150 at the pump, but in the same token, their car payment just went from almost nothing if the car is paid off to now they have a $600 a month payment. But in their head, they're like, no, I'm getting a better value and I'm getting more economy.
Absolutely. But retail car buyers have never made rational choices.
Right.
Clear. I mean, it's all about the monthly payment, which is understandable because that impacts you immediately, as opposed to total cost of ownership, where you have to roll in all the fuel you got to put into it, the maintenance, the oil changes, yada, yada. Automakers and auto dealers for 50 plus years have made very healthy livings and sent lots of kids to college based on retail car buyers not making rational decisions.
Right. Absolutely. That's absolutely correct. So So with that, you start to talk about, electric cars. Back in 2008, there were very few on the market. Now we have real players out there. Every manufacturer, for the most part, has an EV, right? Whether it's good or bad, whatever. But now you have some, Tesla kind of reinvented what the electric car was and put it mainstream to everyone.
Yep.
But now you have companies like Lucid, you have companies like Rivian in the truck market. You have Ford coming out with the F-150 Lightning. Everybody is kind of getting a Porsche with the Taycan. I mean, you've got some wonderful, wonderful machines out there. From a long-term perspective, do you think that, the technology will obviously trickle down to where it's really affordable, and there are some like the Leaf and the e-Golf and things like that. At what point do you think people are really going to start to adopt them?
I think it's a gradual curve. I tend to say it'll be over the balance of my lifetime.
Okay.
Because I'm relatively old. These are transitions that are generational. My best, actually, I think the one I like best is catalytic converters. It's nerdy, but think about the first catalytic converter came out in the US in 1975. Okay. It took until after 2000 for catalytic converters to be standard on cars globally.
Real? Okay. Was it that? That's really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, North America and Europe were quicker, although Europe actually lagged on tailpipe emissions. Different story, but the European cars till about 2009 were filthy. Largely because of the diesels, which were uncontrollable. Yeah. But anyway, but yeah, other markets did not adopt catalytic converters as quickly because remember, they had to switch away to a different kind of fuel. They had to switch to unleaded fuel. So that's just one component. It's a component that really affects public health and emissions, obviously. And it requires some redesign. Electric cars are bigger. The nice thing is consumers didn't essentially get an advantage out of catalytic converters. In fact, the cost went up. They had to find the pump that had the right kind of fuel.
Sure.
Consumers absolutely get advantages out of electric vehicles, but as we've talked about before, they got to get it. The education is a challenge because no one party is responsible for explaining EVs, how they work, how they fit into your life. It's split among the automaker and the dealership and the guy they hired 6 weeks ago to sell you your car and so forth. And so there's this getting it lag. And the best way is the way that people always buy cars. You talk to friends, you talk to relatives, you talk to neighbors, you talk to coworkers. And gradually, like happened with hybrids in the mid 2000s, I mean, the Prius was a fairly unusual looking little beast through all its generations, but people learned it was a real car. It had all the accessories that real cars had. And they began to think, okay, now I get how that is. It's different, but I see how it fits into my life because I see how it fits into her life.
Right.
Same thing will happen with electric cars.
Okay. Do you think that the network, because right now, it was interesting. I have a friend of mine that just did the San Francisco down to Los Angeles trip, and he was all bent. He's got a Tesla, and he was all bent. He stopped down at the bottom of the Grapevine, which is kind of where everybody generally fills up. And he's like, I had to wait for almost 2 hours. He goes, because some of the charging units weren't working. There were people that cars would charge, but they were eating lunch somewhere, things like that. Would you do, and I think about this all the time. I mean, I'm obviously not a commuter anymore, which I'm thrilled about.
Me neither.
But isn't it great?
Yeah.
Isn't it great not commuting? It's the best thing ever.
Why would I go to a place to look at the same screens I can look at from the edge of my living room?
That's exactly right. So like, I always think, like, if I'm going to go EV or hybrid, like, I always think that the hybrid for me personally would be the best choice, because I like having the idea that if my battery runs low, I just throw some gas in the thing and I go on my merry way.
So when you say hybrid in that usage, you're talking about plug-in hybrids, not regular hybrids.
I'm talking about plug-in hybrids. That's correct. Okay. Because I really do like the idea of owning an EV. Yep. I like the idea, the plug-in hybrids right now, I don't know what the max capacity of the max range is. I think it's probably 28 to 30 miles for a plug-in. Is that,
well,
does that
the Volt no longer in production was 53 miles.
Okay.
And the European Union has basically said, we're not giving those sweet, sweet incentives to any plug-in hybrid that has less than 50 kilometers of range, which is about 31 miles. So that's kind of the new floor. And I think we will see some. It's a big question whether plug-in hybrids have a medium-term life or a long-term life. But to get back to your Tesla anecdote and the charging network. So charging is probably the most misunderstood part of owning an EV. In part because there is no model for it. Closest model is your cell phone, but you don't get in your cell phone and drive to grandma's 4.5 hours away. So when people think about cars, they get hybrids, regular hybrids, just like your regular car, except the gerbils drink less under the hood. They get battery electric cars, like Teslas, like Lucids, all the rest. It's a car, it has a big battery, and you have to recharge it when the battery runs low, like your cell phone. Easy concept. My take on plug-in hybrids has always been they're extremely hard to sell to non-engineers, because I tend to think of plug-in hybrids as an engineer's response to a regulator's question that no consumer ever walked into a dealer and asked, which is, hi, how can I drive mostly electric, but not have any range anxiety and still be able to drive to San Francisco tomorrow if I want to?
So no, basically you're saying
ever asked that.
it's a band-aid for somebody that has it's a band-aid for somebody like me who won't buy a full EV because of range anxiety, but still wants to feel like he's driving an electric, but with a backup generator fully attached.
Backup generator, exactly. I will say plug-in hybrids have an important role to play as the gateway drug to full electric vehicle adoption. But so let's talk about charging. One of the things about buying cars, and you talked about low-priced EVs, this is where I sort of wave my hand and say, the data show that last month, the average vehicle transaction price in the US for a new vehicle was 46.
I know, it's insane.
It's
insane. It's insane to me.
Even last summer, there was that horrifying statistic. I forget if it was Edmunds or Cox, sorry guys, that said 40% of new car shoppers were willing to pay $5,000 over stickers to get their car.
Mind-boggling, isn't it? And when you think about that price, when you think about one, paying over sticker, which I couldn't physically, mentally do ever, but having a new car median price or new car average in the 40s. I always think about like that. Listen, 40 grand for, I think, a lot of people is a lot of money. A lot of money for me. I think it's a lot of money for most people.
For journalists,
for journalists, yeah, exactly. So, and when you say, and most people are going out and they're not walking into a dealer and plunking down $40,000 cash.
All about the payments.
All about the payment. And they're financing these things. And I had a great conversation with Matt Farah about this, where they're doing this for like 72, 84, 112.
96 months. Yeah.
I
hope you like that car, dude, because for most of that period, you are underwater.
That's insane to me. That is insane. I mean, and it's funny because people laugh at me when they say, what's your newest car? And I'm like, my newest car is 20 years old. And it is. I have
22.
20, exactly. Yeah. And it's an old Jeep Grand Cherokee I paid $5,000 for at the beginning of COVID because I wanted a runaround vehicle that I didn't have to worry about. And I look at that and I go, all right, that makes sense to me. But $40,000 for a car that I have
for $8,000 today.
That's exactly right. So that statistic is amazing to me.
So, but the reason I brought that up is because everybody talks about, well, not everyone can charge at home, which is true. Multiple unit dwellings are tough. Right. Condo boards, homeowner associations, you name it. Big pain in the backside. Right. And they are more challenging, and regulation is required, and sometimes it's just personalities. Big problem. However, if you look at the data, and this was actually a story I did last summer, when everybody cites an MIT study that says, only 28% of Americans have dedicated off-street parking with access to electricity. So only 1 in 4 people can own an EV.
Yeah.
Well, no. If you look at the universe of people who have enough income to buy a new vehicle, and the majority of the EVs on our road 5 years from now are going to be sold in the next 5 years. That is the sales curve that's coming.
Gotcha.
80% of those people already have dedicated off-street parking, and there may not be electricity within 30 feet. That's a fixable problem. That's
Right.
really a fixable problem. It's slightly more complicated if you got to run, major wiring than wiring a clothes dryer. And no one ever hears about how you can't have a clothes dryer because you can't.
Right.
So if 4 out of 5 new car buyers can already charge an EV at home, they do, they will, and they are. Because already we know 80 to 90% of all the EV miles that are driven are charged at home, usually overnight, or at work on relatively low speed chargers for those people who go to suburban office parks or whatever and just plug in the car. So those are lower speed chargers. They're perfectly fine. That's the bulk of the miles, but we have no way of envisioning that because you don't have a gas pump in your garage. You don't put the nozzle in your tank at 9 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever and come out the next morning and you got a full tank. So number one, people who are going to their first EV have this model of I need to go to a place to fuel. So, and the answer is for 80 to 90%, no, you don't. But let's talk about road trips. The scenario that you cited is the peak demand scenario. Even Tesla was surprised how incredibly many people in California, among their upper income professional Californians, turn out to drive from San Francisco to LA or vice versa every single weekend, which is why I think they have something like 64 charging stations at Harris Ranch. I forget the numbers, but they get bigger. Huge. Yeah. So, and it's the peak demand that's the challenge. As Tesla and everybody else figures out, what are the numbers? Are there any ways to incentivize people driving later or earlier? Can we route them to somewhere else? Or one of the things I love about Teslas is they not only route you through their supercharger stations, they tell you how long to stay, which not every EV does. They all should. The Tesla set the model 10 years ago now for what the charging experience on the road should be. Plug it in, walk away, and then stop. To your point, though, about someone eating dinner, Tesla now penalizes you for staying at the charging station after a certain number of minutes where you're done charging.
Really? I didn't know that. So what do? Do they charge your charging card an extra amount for just kind of hanging out? You don't have
a card with a Tesla. You just plug in your car. Tesla knows who you are, who the driver is, what the credit card is. It's the lowest hassle experience of any EV on the market. And they say, you get a grace period of, I don't know what it is. Tesla owners may watch this and tell me, but you get a grace period. And then they're just like, no, there's a per minute charge for occupying a charging station when you're done charging.
Interesting. That's fantastic.
Think of it as the guy in the pickup truck glowering at you as you come out and sit in your car after you've filled up.
Absolutely.
And you're playing on your phone instead of moving your damn car out.
Absolutely. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So there are some solutions. One of the solutions is going to be longer range cars. Although a lot of the people who do energy math and look at carbon footprint grind their teeth when you talk about the 500-mile EV, because so LUCID, LUCID Air, the model they just introduced, has 500 and is it 518 or 520? I can never remember.
I want to say it's like 518.
Yeah. 500 plus miles of range from a battery pack that is remarkably efficient. Lucid's a fascinating company because, and I have a piece in Car and Driver that at some point during this century will spit out talking about this, but Lucid understands, because they got a bunch of ex-Tesla engineers and a bunch of people who've already worked at EV companies, that you have to optimize every single facet of every single component in the car. Windshield wipers, maybe, but all the power electronics, reducing the weight of the motor, reducing the size of all of the powertrain.
Yeah.
The LUCID powertrain is fascinating because it's
tiny.
about this
Tiny.
big. It's got the power electronics sitting on the engine
Mm-hmm.
or sitting on the motor. God forgive me. And it puts out, what is it, 400 or 500 horsepower?
Yeah.
You know, some really stunning number. And you can have 1 or 2 or 3 of those.
That's right.
I expect that Lucid at some point is going to start doing supply deals with other vehicle makers, sort of a Lucid inside, like Intel inside. They sort of hinted at that. We'll see. But meanwhile, Lucid gets that range off only, I think it's 118 kilowatt hour battery pack or 113. Again, I should have looked this up, but you know, that's not a lot when you look at the comparison with the Mercedes EQS, which is a lovely car, which I really enjoyed driving. It's a big, luxurious Mercedes, all electric, but it uses more battery to go less range. So when you have a 500-mile electric car, all of a sudden it's 1 recharging stop instead of 2 or 3.
Right.
And that's frankly, most drivers can't go 500 miles
well,
without a pit stop anyway.
That's the whole thing. It's like there's a certain point at which your bladder and your body just says, I am done and I need to get out of the car. And that's usually about the 3, if you're really pushing it, the 4-hour mark. Right.
You're younger than I am. You'll see.
I mean, when I do my LA run, and I generally do that about once a month, it is, I go from my place in San Francisco down to the base of the Grapevine. And from my house down to there, it's 287 miles. Right. So that is, and most of my vehicles, I say almost everything I own can make it down there on 1 tank of fuel. And when you think about that, that's the point. And that's cruising. That's on the 5, which I consider America's Autobahn. You could cruise at 90, 100 miles an hour. And nobody really says anything. You know, but you're down there and you stop off. You're going to fill your car with fuel. You're going to get a cup of coffee. It's 25 minutes. Right.
Well, this is the thing. And unlike those states where you have to sit there and squeeze the pump handle because they have outlawed trigger locks. Right. Or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
So you're sort of stuck there for the fueling period. Electric car, you plug it in and walk away.
Right.
So you get more use out of that period. And everybody plays on their phone for 8 minutes anyway.
Of course they do. Of course they do. But I mean, the nice part about that is, you know, you are going to stretch, you are going to, unless you're doing some kind of like cannonball across the United States where you need your stops to be 6 minutes at a maximum.
And that is not a use case that any automaker is designing for.
Absolutely correct. But, you know, when you talk about that 500-mile thing, it's one of those things where that's what I always judge. But my thing on range is, because I do a lot of open road and road trip driving.
Right.
I want 300, an honest 300 miles of range at 85 to 90 miles an hour with the heat or the AC or the headlights on. That's what I want. And that's why for somebody like me, that's why the Lucid is intriguing, because my thought is if they're saying it's 518 miles on a charge, right? Well, that in my head, I'm going, well, then I could hammer down to Los Angeles with everything on kill and still and make it in 1 charge.
Yep.
Right. That's what I like to see as somebody who just likes to do open road stuff. For around town, my God, it would be spectacular, because I wouldn't even, there is no anxiety in the back of my head, always knowing that I'm going to get where I want to go.
And that was the thing. The very first time I drove a Chevy Bolt in late 2016, all of it, you know, having been used to cars with ranges of 74 to 125 miles, all of a sudden you get in the car, it says 238 miles, and you just don't think about it for a couple hours. And that's that takes step 1 of the worry out. Step 2 of the worry is people will buy 300-mile Lucids knowing that there is a 500-mile version, just by sort of saying, I'm buying the lower end one. I'm confident it'll do what I need, but look, EVs are possible even for edge cases.
Right. So, exactly.
Trying to think, what have I driven lately? So I just got out of the BMW iX, which is their, this is an interesting story. about the car, just because when it started years back, it was going to be their absolute technology halo vehicle, high-end luxury SUV, and fully autonomous.
Yeah.
Regrettably, life intervened. And so it has become their luxury technology halo vehicle, all electric. And there will be some advanced driver assistance systems layered in as they become legal and are tested. It's a lovely car. It's big and heavy, but it drives well. It handles nicely, predictably, and I expect they will sell a number of them to expensive suburbs. I am personally not a fan of BMW's current styling idiom. There are many words for it. I won't.
Sucks. I'll say it. It's terrible.
Two gigantic grills about yay big.
Why does everything have to look like a big beaver?
Blanking plates, like a beaver, bucktooth. Yeah. Who am I to judge? But it did get a lot of looks, generally approvingly. Okay. Before that, I drove the Jaguar I-Pace, which remains one of my favorites, just because they are so lovely to drive.
They are. I agree with that.
Everything about handling and just it wants to be driven hard on curvy roads wherever you want. I don't think I would own one, but this one was at least properly screwed together, which the last handful have not been. The last handful felt like beta products. This one did not. And so I'm happy about that 3 years after they started. And boy, those are the last two that sort of stick to mind. But what are the EV questions?
Well, I think just before we hit that, I think it's funny because the last one that I just had, which is not an EV, literally the antithesis of the EV, I just gave back a 2022 CT5 Blackwing, a Cadillac CT5 Blackwing, which was 6.2 liter blown V8, almost 700 horsepower, just fire breathing, absurd car with a manual transmission. Right. And it's so funny because I had posted about it and we had a lot of people that just kind of chimed in. Well, do you think, gas is $6-7 a gallon? Do you think people are really going to buy this car? Blah, 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 And I said, they will sell every single one they make.
Yep.
Every single one. And people are fighting me and they're like, you're out of your mind.
Not that many.
Not that many. They're not making 60,000 of these things. They're making like 200.
Only it had an AMG badge or an M badge.
Exactly.
They could sell 10 times as many. It's a brand problem. It's not a vehicle problem.
Exactly. So I look at that and it's, like and somebody was like, would you buy that over like a Model S Plaid? And it's and I was like, well, I'm not really cross shopping that between it's apples and oranges, right? Yes, the Plaid is faster in every way. It will always be faster, and that's totally fine. But one is obviously an EV. The other one is all about bravado and theater and excitement, right? My biggest thing,
by which I think you mean noise.
It is noise. It is noise, but it's also vibration. It's also seat of the pants feel. It's also the fact that I have a manual. It's the fact that I relate to it, right? So we did this thing. We had gone up to at Sonoma Raceway. There's the Wednesday night drifts and drags, and last time I had gone, there was a guy that came up and he had a Plaid. And I've said this before, but he went up there and everybody was like, oh my God, it's a Tesla Plaid. He flat-footed. He ran like 950, whatever the hell he ran at 140, whatever miles he ran. And everybody goes, oh my God. And then it was completely forgettable because the next car that came up was a wheel standing 70 Camaro that everybody lost their mind. And so I get it. For me, if I was going to use it as a daily driver, I would do something like a Lucid or a Tesla or something along those lines because the simplicity and the beauty of driving in silence is really nice. The Cadillac is something that's more of that's a second car or a third car. It's something that you take out and it makes you giggle on the weekends, and you really don't give a crap about fuel, right? Doesn't matter what it costs. You put money in it, you don't care, right?
A friend of mine called the Blackwing series tuner cars for adults, which made a certain amount of sense. the point, you beat me to the point, which is that you can use a Model S, a Plaid every day. You
Mhm.
probably can't use a wheel standing 70 Camaro every day.
No. And
I wouldn't
mean,
want to drive that down to the base of the grapevine.
no. And that's, it's interesting. We have these conversations. I mean, we're kind of skewing away from topic, but like I was telling a friend, I have my 68 Charger. I drove that down to LA about 3 months ago to get some work done on it. And it was 500 miles to my destination.
Ooh.
I filled that up 5 times. And when I got there, I was shell shocked. And I was just, because it beats you to death, right? Yes, the Cadillac is 1,000 times quieter. It does everything 1,000 times better. But it's still, it's more of it's a guilty pleasure. Whereby if you were to say which one, if you could have one or the other, which would you buy, but you had to use it every single day, I would opt for something like a Lucid or, a Tesla like that. And everybody out there who knows me in the muscle car world is going to be like, you son of a bitch, trader. But I mean, I'm not 22 years old anymore, right? I'm at the point in my life where you want something that's more comfortable.
Yeah.
But for the EVs, I think they're becoming a lot more standardized. I think that people are starting to look at them, especially now with fuel the way it is. I just hope before they plunk down their money, they look at the financial side of it and don't fall into, well, if I extend it for 120 months, I can get it for X amount of dollars, not realizing that, in 10 years, is that battery still going to be working as efficient as it would be? And then are you going to be completely upside down on your investment? Right. So,
right. The only thing I would add to that, and then we'll shift along, Toyota, which has been late, reluctant, and sulky about having to sell EVs at all ever, is coming out with their first compact crossover EV with the compelling, sexy name of BZ4X.
Yeah, that's going to sell like hotcakes.
Subaru will probably outsell them just by naming the same vehicle with a Subaru badge, Solterra. Actually, each maker will sell exactly the number they need to achieve regulatory compliance, and not a single one more.
Right.
You heard it here. But that said, Toyota did something that no other maker has done. They have warranted their battery for 90% of capacity after 10 years.
Wow, that's huge.
No other maker has done that. So we will see more of that, I think.
Okay.
Makers warrant their batteries against failure. If your battery you get a new one. Yeah. There is, some makers have rules about, or warranties on capacity, but they are often things like 75% after 5 years. You have to beat the living crap out of most cars to get down that low that quick.
Right.
And I honestly have not done a grid of the batteries, and the warranties, but I think we will see more of that where there is a little bit of down the road certainty. I don't think people expect 100% of the battery after 10 years and 100,000 miles, but 90% is an envisionable amount. If the car comes with a range of 250 miles, 10 years later, the range is 225. People can live with that.
That's right. Okay. So now that we talked about fuel and we've talked about EVs and we've talked about charging and we've talked about all sorts of other stuff, let's talk about tempting fake tours, because
let's talk about stupid ass driving.
Because this is my favorite thing in the world. Road trips are my favorite thing in the world to do. So everybody says, if you're going to go on vacation, what do you want to do? I said, I want to buy a car. I want to take it from point A to point B and see if I can make it. Most people look at that as they go like, well, you're somewhat of a masochist, which I say, okay, sure, but it's still a lot of fun to do.
Right.
You just did this in 2 cars that were 30 plus years old. Almost 30 plus years old, into extremely obscure cars, which some of our listeners might have no idea what they are. Tell us a little bit about the impetus of the idea, why in God's name you chose the cars that you chose, and what the experience was. And then we'll get into the video series that you filmed around it. I've watched every segment and it's a hoot. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. Well, it was February. We were bored.
Okay.
My friend Tom has done multiple trips of this sort. Tom buys and occasionally sells old British cars and other cars, some Japanese cars. But Tom is the sort of guy who may end up buying, a Daimler V8 250, which is a mid-60s Jaguar sedan, but with a teeny weeny little 2.5-liter V8 that,
Right.
But the only manual one in the US, and it happens to be in the Pacific Northwest, and Tom lives in New Hampshire. So he says to his wife, Beth, hey, I just bought this. You want to fly out there and drive it back? And Beth says, absolutely. Let's go.
Wow.
Beth is fabulous.
I was going to say that's a spouse. That's impressive.
And they've done that in an MGB and a Triumph Dolomite, and I forget what all else. Anyway, so he has a lot of experience in that. We both took cars to Radwood, Boston just before COVID hit. Loved it. And, it's one of those January, February chats where it's sort of like, wouldn't it be great to go to Radwood, Austin?
Sure.
And we're sort of like, yeah, that'd be good. Things are going to loosen up. Well, what do we take? And then he found an ad for a Sterling for sale. And I'll talk about what a Sterling is in a minute. And I was the one who said, look, driving a Sterling from Seattle or Portland to Austin, Texas is a crazy ass trip. Like 2 Sterlings. That's fun.
You're off the reservation now. I mean,
so
what is a Sterling? Tell people what a Sterling is, because these cars were made in the time where American manufacturers were working with different it's all in the time. Like, remember when, you tell the Sterling and then I'll jump in.
Sterling is one of the last attempts by the now departed British car industry to sell cars in America that were not high-end luxury cars. There's a company called Rover at that time, which related to Land Rover, won't do the genealogy, where they did a deal with Honda in the mid-'80s. They needed technology, and Honda wanted to get a foothold into Europe. So they co-designed what became in the States the Acura Legend, the very first generation Acura Legend. And Rover took that underpinnings, all the hard points are the same. The V6 engine and the automatic are the same. And Rover dressed it in a different set of clothes, totally different interior, leather, wood, the whole bit, British, and tried to sell it in the States. And they called it a Sterling because the Rover brand was tied up in Land Rover and some other stuff. And people saw the original car. They're clean, they were modern, they had Trippin. And so they signed up a bunch of dealers. They sold them for 5 years, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91.
Okay.
Those of you who have owned British cars will not be surprised to know that the quality was subpar. And in fact, it was rated the single worst quality car by J.D. Power introduced. Yay.
So let's take 2 of those. That's a great idea.
Well, hey, we minimized our risk. We took them from the end of the run because quality did improve somewhat.
Well, Honda drivetrains, power plants.
So Honda V6, absolutely bulletproof, nice engine. And I should point out, not only are both cars more than 30 years old, they have more than 400,000 miles combined on them.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Mine, I had either forgotten or suppressed the fact that it had 283,000 miles when I bought it. And I got there and I was like, oh, did you tell me that? And the guy's like, all right. So I should say we bought them really cheap. And it was basically, are we going to be able to do this? How many times? My better half suggested that we call it the bankrupt AAA tour. How many times can we cause AAA to come out and have to flatbed a car? The punchline is they did not actually die ever between Portland, Yakima, Portland again, and then down to Austin.
So how many miles in total was the trip?
Between the 2 cars, it was 5,850.
So that's for an untested used vehicle with well over for 2 untested, well-used vehicles with over 200,000 miles on, with let's just throw the whole Brit thing in there, right? Throw
British
that in
assembly.
there, right? British assembly. To go and make it without without either one of you on the back of a flatbed, that's kind of astonishing to me.
We were pleased. It didn't make for great video drama, but that's okay. We talked about it a lot because both of us were sort of, all right, let's see how we get today. And after day 3 or 4, we're like, okay, let's take them into Death Valley.
Right.
And so probably the thing is, after 30 years, the drivetrain is bulletproof.
Mm-hmm.
All the rest of the stuff that's broken has already broken. And each of the cars has issues. The trip computer on mine, the screen's essentially dead. So it beeps at me now and then. No idea why, but it keeps going. And there were control issues, heating issues, various bits and pieces. My car had a trans shifting problem. And all that said, once you got used to that, they're really nice cruising cars because it's basically an Acura Legend.
Right. Sure.
Set of clothes. And I would happily drive a 30-year-old Acura Legend from, Portland to wherever. So this was that same thing. It wasn't necessarily British running gear made in 1968 to a design laid down in 1952.
Right.
So, and after a while, we just kind of lightened up and it's like, all right, well, let's go to the Grand Canyon and let's do Monument Valley in the same day.
Right.
Cool. Let's go.
Right. So did you have a plan as far as, or was it relatively loose? Because I know that Radwood was unfortunately canceled due to weather, right? Which kind of
in the middle of our trip.
Yeah.
Call. Guess what? Yeah.
So that obviously threw a wrench into the whole deal. But was that a good thing or was that a bad thing? Because I know when you have something like that interrupt you, you go, well, the hell do we do now?
Yeah. We had already set up a friend to stay with in Austin. Well, 90 minutes outside Austin, who conveniently had a barn. And so we talked about it for a day because literally we heard, I don't know, day 5, day 6, whenever it was.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like, crap, what do we do now? But after a day, we said, let's keep going. We're going to go through some cool places. Let's visit our friends. Let's end up where we plan to end up. And we'll just stash the cars, which leads to sort of the part that's not on video yet. There are going to be some videos coming.
Oh, good.
Yeah. No, we have there's a lot of amazing Monument Valley footage.
So the series didn't end with the last episode that's up there now?
Correct. We're just taking a hiatus because Alex Kalagianis has, actually work to do the pace. He's our video meister. He's sitting at home and taking all this crap we throw at him and making wonderful videos. Thank you, Alex. So no, we have 2-3 more videos coming. And we are going back to Radwood. It's April 23rd. We are going to resurrect the cars from the barn, clean off any pigeon poop, and maybe detail them if we get ambitious, at least wash them, and take them to Radwood and reinitiate the original plan, which is to sell the little monsters. So this is my sales pitch. If you are coming to Radwood, Austin, you really want to buy a Sterling. And we have 2 available.
Well, I'll tell you, I think people need to go and watch the series because the videos aren't long. The videos are between, what is it, like 3 and 5 minutes?
3 and 4 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, they're short, but they have a great flow to them. John has done a masterful job of voiceovers where footage is lacking, but tons of beautiful stills. But the key is that it's a fun ride along. The voiceover is engaging. The footage that you guys shot is engaging. The length is perfect because you could sit down and watch it while you're sipping on your coffee while something. It's just a fun series. And it's, again, Tempting Fate Tours. You have to go to YouTube to see it. And John, where can they find it?
We hope to get the Tempting Fate Tours URL. We're working on it right now because I think there's some hurdle. So for the moment, go to YouTube's main page and just type in Tempting Fate Tours, 3 words.
Okay. So you have to do that. you will get a full rundown of what these vehicles are, because I watched every single episode, thoroughly enjoyed it, and they go through the cars pretty thoroughly. So you'll get an idea. And then comment, I think, because that's one thing that a lot of people don't do on YouTube videos, right? I know when I first started making videos, I would always love to see what the comments were, good or bad, because that's the only way as somebody who's presenting or filming a video gets better at what they do, right? The audience needs to tell them either you're fantastic or you suck or you're somewhere in between. And then you could kind of go off that and improve, the next one. But John, will these cars be at Radwood?
These cars will be at Radwood, Austin on April 23rd. Probably as soon as they open the gates. Look for 2 relatively square red sedans. One's dark maroon, one's medium maroon. It's funny. They were sold as essentially mid-sized luxury cars in 1990. They are now probably about the size of a BMW 3 Series that you would buy today. It's remarkable how much cars have gotten bigger.
No. I mean, I could totally, like, I have an old 79 BMW E12, which is a 5 Series. Yeah. And it is literally the size of a BMW 2 Series.
Yes.
So yeah, growth has run rampant in the automotive industry.
Although fewer doors.
Yeah.
But
so go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I'm assuming the Radwood gods will let us park next to each other. It would be great if there were more Sterlings than just 2, but we hope, intend, and occasionally pray to sell them before the end of Radwood, and then we'll just fly home. There is a barn if we don't, but what that will allow us to do, we're already having those awkward discussions about, well, an MGB GT and a Morris Minor van, or what about a K car and maybe this really ratty but running Austin Healey? So we'll see.
So solid, well thought out vehicles that are perfect for road trips, obviously.
I don't know what you're getting at.
Well, listen, John, that was a quick hour. Jesus.
All right.
First off, everybody, like I said, tune in, watch Tempting Fate Tours with John Voelcker and his friend, because it's fantastic. If you have questions or comments, post them up, because when it comes to like EVs and everything that's going on in the world of that and hybrids and stuff, John knows more than you do. I could pretty much, unless you're an engineer working for the companies, John knows more than you. So ask the questions and then we'll try to get you the right answers. Otherwise, John, thank you so much for coming back. It really is. It's always a pleasure to talk and kind of bullshit for a while.
Yeah,
it does.
So,
it does.
Great to talk to you. I always have a soft spot in my heart for Hemmings. And so are you going to be at Radwood, Austin?
So no, I'm not going to be at Radwood, Austin. We're actually doing another big road trip. We are, we did a show last year called Road to Improvement, where we took a 1981 Chevy Suburban. We filmed a series on it, and I was the green one, big green. That's what we called it. And Alana Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah,
and it was great because I'm not a big fan of build shows, because I hate the idea of taking a vehicle on these shows and then they build it within a week. And then you never see the vehicle again. Yeah. And my thing was, well, hell, let's just do it on the road, which I didn't really think through when I first had the concept, because I'm like, that's not going to be a problem. It's always a problem. So what we ended up doing was buying the Suburban, doing a 3,500 mile road trip throughout the country, and every single stop we would upgrade it. So we would do, stop one was get rid of the old manual, Granny 3-speed and put in a modern day 5-speed. Next stop was put in air conditioning. The next stop was, to do interior. The next stop was do heads in a cam and stuff like that. So, but the cool part about that was we were able to road test and torture test every part we put on the vehicle over this 3,500 mile trip. So we are doing it again this year. So that's what I will be doing then, is driving a different vehicle, which is much more performance oriented than a Suburban, which you guys will see when the video comes out.
Shocked.
It's I know. It is something from the mid 1980s. Think of the muscle cars from the 1980s, and there's like 4 to choose from, and you'll get an idea. Something close. So
Okay.
we're gonna do that. Turn it into somewhat of a modernized. Well, let's put it this way: get much better performance that it had in the mid 1980s, and make it into somewhat of a road trip / occasional HPDE, which is a track day car.
Okay.
That we can go have fun with. That's the goal of that one. So
So
that's
you're
what I will
not
be doing.
battery converting it.
Not battery converting. No, but I am absolutely
next year.
I'm not opposed to it. I'm really not opposed to it. So yeah, that's what we'll be doing while you are selling Sterlings at Radwood.
I love the suburban trip because I actually did my own suburban road trip from Phoenix and then around sort of the top of the country to end up in upstate New York after filling it full of rusty 70-year-old British car parts. So big fan of suburban trips.
Very, very cool. So John, in closing, where can everybody find you? What are the best social tags? Where should everybody go?
Social tag, the biggest one is Twitter, and it's at John Voelcker. And I'm not sure if you put crawls on, so I'm going to spell it. JOHNV like Victor, OELCKER. I'm also very Googleable. My articles are in Car and Driver, on The Drive, Charged EVs, and a bunch of other places.
Wonderful. Sir, thank you again for coming on.
Oh, thank you as always. It's great fun. Hopefully we can see each other in person at some point.
I think we're going to have to do that, man. Yeah. There's no question, because it's the one thing about the podcast is I get to talk and chat with all these wonderful people. And now that the world is kind of hopefully somewhat going back to normal, I'll get to see everybody in person and have a couple of drinks and continue the bullshitting, but doing it on a wonderful level in person at some place.
Podcast party.
Podcast. Exactly. So, John, thanks again, buddy. And to everybody out there, thanks for tuning in to the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ. As always, take a look at our classifieds. If you want to buy a car, we've got 25 to 30,000 up there. We also have one kick-ass auction site of which you guys can utilize to buy a dream car. Otherwise, that's it. And we'll see you next time.
Good night.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button. And we'll come to you every week.